What do you do when a customer from the past places an order in the present? Ellis Sorensen followed the map to a building that vanished 30 years ago, only to hear someone breathing on the other end of the line. Something is trapped under this dirt, and it just placed an order. The porch light on his phone screen glowed warm and steady, promising a house that should have been right in front of him. Instead, there was only a flat stretch of weeds, broken concrete, and a chain-link fence sagging under the weight of decades. The GPS said he had arrived. The wind rattling through the empty lot said otherwise. His delivery bag hung heavy on his shoulder, the smell of garlic and warm bread doing nothing to settle the cold twisting in his stomach. Then his phone buzzed. A text. 2 words, sent from an address that had not existed since 1994. Almost there. If that hook already put a chill down your spine, imagine what it felt like standing in that lot at 11 at night, with the wind picking up. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because Ellis is about to find out exactly what's waiting under that dirt. And trust me, you don't want to miss a second of how this unfolds. Ellis Sorensen had been driving for the delivery app for almost 2 years, and in that time he thought he'd seen every strange thing Stockton had to offer. Drunk customers who ordered 3 pizzas and then didn't answer the door. Houses with too many locks and dogs that barked like the world was ending. A woman once tipped him $40 just because he found her cat on the porch. Ellis figured nothing about this job could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. It was a quiet Thursday night in July, the kind of warm California evening where the heat doesn't let go even after the sun goes down. Ellis had just dropped off a taco order in Midtown, a neighborhood of small bungalows and cracked sidewalks that had seen better decades, when his phone buzzed with a new request. He glanced at the screen while he waited at a red light. The tip caught his eye first. $18, more than double what he usually made on a single run. The order was simple, a large order of soup and bread from a diner on Pacific Avenue, headed to an address a few blocks over. Ellis smiled to himself and hit accept. Easy money, he thought. He had no idea how wrong that thought would turn out to be. The diner smelled like onions and butter when he walked in, and the woman behind the counter handed him 2 paper bags without much conversation. Ellis clipped his phone into the dashboard mount, checked the address one more time, and pulled out onto the street. The drive took him past familiar landmarks, a laundromat with a flickering sign, a church with a chain-link fence around a small garden, a row of houses that had been there since before he was born. Stockton wasn't a flashy city. It was a working city, full of people trying to get by, and Ellis had grown up here, delivered food on nearly every block of it. The GPS voice told him to turn left, then guided him down a narrow residential street lined with older homes, some well-kept, others sagging under years of neglect. He slowed as the blue dot on his screen closed in on the destination. The house pictured on the app's map thumbnail was a 2-story colonial with a wide porch and a warm yellow light glowing behind lace curtains. Ellis had delivered to plenty of places like that. Nothing unusual there. Then he looked up from his phone and out through his windshield. There was no house. Ellis blinked, thinking maybe he'd misread the address, and checked his phone again. The pin sat exactly where his car had stopped. According to the app, he had arrived. According to his own eyes, he was parked next to an empty lot, overgrown with weeds that came up past his knees. The ground cracked and uneven where a foundation might have once been poured. A chain-link fence, rusted and leaning, ran along one side of the property, half swallowed by wild grass. There were no lights, no porch, no lace curtains. Just silence, and the distant hum of a highway somewhere beyond the trees. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, soup bags warm on the passenger seat. This had to be a mistake. Maybe the app had the wrong photo attached, some kind of glitch that happens sometimes with older listings. He climbed out of the car anyway, because that $18 tip wasn't going to deliver itself, and maybe the actual house was just set back further than the picture suggested. The night air was warm but carried something underneath it, a coolness that didn't match the July heat. like stepping into the shadow of a building even though there was no building there to cast one. Ellis walked the length of the fence, his shoes crunching over gravel and broken glass. He found no driveway, no mailbox, no sign that a home had ever stood on this patch of land in his lifetime. He pulled out his phone and opened the delivery app's chat feature, typing a quick message to the customer. "Hey, I'm here, but I don't see a house. Can you confirm the address?" The three dots appeared almost instantly, like someone had been waiting for his message. Then they disappeared. No reply came. Ellis frowned and tried calling instead, tapping the little phone icon next to the customer's name, which the app listed only as W. Finch. The call connected, and for a second there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your eardrum and makes you check if the call actually went through. Then came a sound, distant and distorted, like a radio caught between two stations. A crackle of static, and underneath it something that might have been a voice, thin and warped, syllables stretched too long or cut too short to understand. "Hello?" Ellis said, his own voice sounding too loud in the empty street. "Sir, I think there's an issue with the address on your order." The static answered him, nothing more. Then the call dropped on its own, the screen returning to the home menu like nothing had happened at all. Ellis stood there a moment, food bags dangling from his hand, and told himself it was just bad reception. Old copper lines maybe, or some kind of tower interference out here on the edge of the neighborhood. He'd heard the area used to have some industrial history, and old wiring did strange things sometimes. That explanation made sense. It was the kind of explanation that let him keep standing in a dark, empty lot without his skin crawling. He walked closer to where the address would have placed a front door, if there had been a front door, if there had been a house at all. The overgrown grass gave way here to a patch of cracked concrete, gray and sun-bleached, poking up through the weeds like the bones of something long dead. Ellis crouched down and ran his fingers along the edge of it. Definitely a foundation. Definitely something had stood here once. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a notification from the app. Customer is nearby. Ellis felt the hair on his arms rise before his mind even caught up to why. He was standing in an empty lot. There was no customer. There was no house. There was nowhere for anyone to be nearby except the open street behind him and the tangled weeds in front of him, and both were empty as far as he could see, in the weak glow of a street lamp 2 houses down. "This isn't funny," he said out loud, to no one, because saying it out loud felt better than the alternative, which was standing here in total silence, with his heart starting to pound against his ribs. He checked the app again, and something new caught his eye. Below the customer's name, in small gray text he hadn't noticed before, was a note. Order placed at 9:47 p.m. Ellis frowned. He'd accepted the order 20 minutes ago, sure, but he glanced at the time on his phone. It read 11:52 p.m. The math didn't work. Delivery times on the app usually ran 15-20 minutes tops for a job like this. There was no version of tonight where the order had been placed almost 2 hours before he'd even picked it up. He tried to rationalize it. A glitch. A system error. Apps broke all the time. Everyone knew that. And this one had crashed on him twice last month alone during regular shifts. He decided he'd mark the delivery as undeliverable, drive back to the diner, maybe get a partial refund credited, and put this whole strange night behind him. He turned back toward his car, food bag still in hand, ready to leave. That's when the temperature dropped. It happened all at once, not gradually, like stepping from a warm room into a walk-in freezer. Ellis's breath fogged in front of his face, despite the California summer heat, despite the fact that 10 seconds ago sweat had been prickling on the back of his neck. He stopped walking. The night around him had gone unnaturally still. No crickets, no distant traffic hum, no wind moving through the weeds that had been rustling just moments before. His phone buzzed again. He looked down at the screen with hands that had started to shake, just slightly, just enough that he noticed. A new notification sat waiting for him. Order received. Ellis stared at those two words for a long moment, his mind refusing to process what they meant. He hadn't handed anything to anyone. He hadn't set the bags down. He hadn't seen a single living soul since he'd left the diner. And yet, according to the app, the delivery was complete, and beneath the status update, a small digital signature had appeared, the kind customers sometimes scrawled on their screens to confirm receipt. The signature read, W. Finch. Ellis looked down at his hands. He was still holding both bags of soup, the paper damp now with condensation, the food inside surely gone cold. Nobody had taken them. Nobody had touched them. And yet the app insisted, in clean digital certainty, that the order had been delivered and received, signed for by a man whose house did not exist, on a street where Ellis Sorensen stood completely, terrifyingly alone. He turned to run for his car, and that's when he heard it. A voice, close now, closer than the phone had carried it, right at his shoulder like someone standing directly behind him in the dark. Thank you for the delivery. Ellis spun around. There was no one there, just the empty lot, the leaning fence, and the cracked concrete where a front door used to be. If you're already getting chills imagining what Ellis heard standing in that empty lot, drop a comment right now with the words "keep going," because what he's about to find buried in the archives about the man who used to live there is going to make your skin crawl even more. Hit that subscribe button too, because episode 2 goes somewhere you will not see coming. Ellis didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed with all the lights on in his apartment, replaying the sound of that voice over and over until it stopped feeling real and started feeling like something his exhausted brain had invented out of fear and bad Wi-Fi. By morning, in the flat gray light of a California sunrise, he'd almost convinced himself of exactly that. A trick of the wind, a glitch in the call, nothing more. Almost. The problem was the signature. He kept pulling up the app on his phone, staring at that delivery confirmation, the two cold words and the name scrawled beneath them. W. Finch. The order still showed as completed. The $18 tip had already been deposited into his account, clean and simple, like any other job. If it had all been some glitch, some system error, the money shouldn't have gone through. But it had. He decided to do something he'd never done for any other delivery in 2 years of driving for the app. He decided to find out who used to live at that address. Ellis spent his lunch break at the downtown Stockton library, sitting at one of the old public computers, typing the street address into the local historical archive database the librarian had shown him how to access. It took a while. City records from the early 90s hadn't all been digitized cleanly, and half the property files came up as scanned images too blurry to read at first glance. But eventually, on the third search, something came up, a permit filing, a demolition order dated March of 1994. The address matched. According to the file, the property had been a single-family home, condemned and scheduled for demolition following a structure fire earlier that same year. Ellis felt his stomach tighten as he scrolled further, finding a digitized newspaper clipping from the Stockton Record, the print faded but legible. The headline read, "House Fire Claims Life on Willow Street." Ellis's hands went cold reading it. The article was short, the kind of small local story that runs once and gets forgotten, but it named a resident, Walter Finch, 61 years old, a longtime fixture of the neighborhood, known to many locals simply as Old Finch. The fire had started in the early hours of a Sunday morning in February, and by the time firefighters arrived, most of the structure was already engulfed. Finch had not made it out. Ellis sat back in his chair, the fluorescent library lights humming overhead, and read the last line of the article twice to make sure he'd understood it correctly. Neighbors described Finch as a quiet man who lived alone since his wife's passing years earlier, a man known around the block for always tipping the newspaper boy and the milkman generously, rain or shine, holiday or not. Ellis felt something crawl up the back of his neck reading that detail. A man who always tipped generously, a customer who'd left him $18 on a soup order that never should have existed. He printed the article, folded it into his jacket pocket, and drove straight to the block that evening, instead of clocking into his shift. The neighborhood looked different in daylight fading to dusk, ordinary in a way that made the previous night feel almost embarrassing to think about. He knocked on the door of the house closest to the empty lot, an older bungalow with a wheelchair ramp built onto the porch. An elderly woman answered, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, introducing herself as Corinne. When Ellis explained he was asking about the history of the lot next door. Old Finch's place, Corinne said, before Ellis had even finished his sentence. Like she'd been waiting 30 years for someone to ask. Nobody's built on that lot since the fire. City never sold it. Kept getting caught up in some kind of estate dispute, from what I remember. Walter didn't have family that anyone knew of, no next of kin who ever came forward, so the property just sat there. Weeds took it over eventually. Ellis asked her, carefully, if she remembered anything strange about that block since then. Corinne's expression shifted, something guarded crossing her face. Strange like what? Like people seeing things, hearing things. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Ellis thought she might close the door on him. Instead, she said, my husband used to say he heard someone walking on that lot some nights, back before he passed. Footsteps in the grass, like someone pacing. I told him it was raccoons, told myself the same thing, if I'm being honest with you. She studied Ellis's face like she was trying to decide something. You're not the first delivery driver to come around here asking questions, you know. Ellis felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean? Young man came by maybe 2 months back. Said the same kind of thing. Order sent him to that lot. Thought his phone was broken. Corinne shook her head slowly. I told him what I told my husband. Raccoons. But raccoons don't sign for packages, do they? Ellis thanked her and walked back to his car in the fading light, his mind racing through everything he now knew and everything that still didn't add up. He sat behind the wheel and pulled out his phone, scrolling back through his delivery history out of some instinct he couldn't quite name. Buried in the log, dated from 2 nights ago, sat an entry he didn't remember accepting. A delivery to a street called Larkspur Court, an address the app's own map function returned no results for when he tried to search it. The order status read completed. The tip, once again, was unusually high. His phone buzzed in his hand, making him flinch. A new order request had just come through, the little notification banner sliding down from the top of his screen. Ellis stared at the customer name before he even opened it, some part of him already certain of what he'd find. W. Finch. His thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct told him to decline it, to block the number, to delete the app entirely, and never drive another shift in his life. But underneath the fear was something else. Something he didn't expect to feel standing in his car outside a dead man's empty lot. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, the same kind of pull that had sent him to the library that afternoon in the first place. Walter Finch had died alone, forgotten by a city that let his home rot into weeds for 30 years. Somebody, or something, wearing his name was still out there placing orders nobody could explain. Ellis accepted the request. The order this time was different. Not soup, not bread. The item listed was a single loaf of rye bread from a bakery 3 blocks from his own apartment. The kind of specific, old-fashioned request that felt less like a random glitch and more like a memory somebody was trying to relive. The delivery address populated automatically. Willow Street. The same lot. He drove to the bakery first, and the woman behind the counter, an older Filipino woman named Imelda, who Ellis had delivered from a dozen times before, handed him the wrapped loaf without any unusual comment. Everything about the pickup felt achingly normal, which somehow made what came next feel worse. Back on Willow Street, the sun had fully set, and the empty lot looked exactly as it had 2 nights before. Weeds swaying faintly in a warm breeze, the leaning chain-link fence catching the last of the streetlight's glow. Ellis parked and sat in his car for a full minute, bread on the passenger seat, gathering his nerve. Then he climbed out, walked to the same spot near the cracked concrete foundation where he'd stood before, and set the loaf down gently on the broken ground. He didn't wait around to see what happened. He turned, walked quickly back to his car, and had his hand on the door handle when his phone buzzed one final time. The notification read, "Order received." The signature beneath it once again reading, W. Finch. Time-stamped for a delivery that had happened not seconds ago, but for a moment, 30 seconds behind Ellis's actual movements, like the app was recording an echo of events that hadn't quite caught up to the present. Ellis turned back toward the lot, and in the dim light, he saw the loaf of rye bread sitting exactly where he'd left it. Except now the paper wrapping looked different. Aged, yellowed and brittle at the edges, the bread inside visibly stale, hardened, as though it had been sitting in that spot exposed to weather for 30 years instead of 30 seconds. His phone buzzed one more time, a text this time, not from the app's system, but from the customer thread itself, the words appearing letter by letter like someone typing them in real time from somewhere very far away and very close all at once. Same time next week? Ellis didn't answer. He got in his car, locked the doors, and drove until his hands stopped shaking, and somewhere in that drive, an idea began to take shape that scared him more than anything he'd seen on Willow Street. If Walter Finch could place an order once, could place it twice, then whatever was happening on that lot wasn't a one-time glitch in a dying man's memory. It was a pattern, a ritual, and Ellis had just proven that he was willing to keep answering the call. If your heart is pounding right now wondering what happens the next time Ellis goes back to that lot, comment "reveal it" below and smash that subscribe button, because episode 3 is where the truth about Willow Street finally comes out, and it is so much bigger than one man and one house. Booker Reyes had been driving for the app almost as long as Ellis had, and the two of them had crossed paths often enough at the diner on Pacific Avenue, waiting on orders, trading complaints about bad tippers and worse traffic. Ellis found him there on a Friday night, 2 weeks after the rye bread had aged 30 years and 30 seconds, and asked him straight out if he'd ever delivered to an address that didn't exist. Booker didn't laugh the question off the way Ellis half expected him to. Instead, his face went still, and he set down his coffee cup slowly, like he needed both hands free for what he was about to say. "There's a strip of old warehouses off Charter Way," Booker said. "Torn down back in the 80s, I heard. Some kind of fire there, too, though nobody talks about the details much. I got an order out there last winter. Coat delivery, if you can believe that. Some app that does clothing runs, too. GPS put me right in front of a chain-link fence and a pile of rubble. I figured it was a bad address, marked it undeliverable, and got out of there. Never told anybody. Figured they'd think I was losing it." Ellis told him everything then. The empty lot, the static voice, the stale bread, the signature that kept appearing under a dead man's name. Booker listened without interrupting, and when Ellis finished, Booker sat back in the booth and rubbed a hand over his face. "So it's not just your lot," Booker said quietly. "It's happening at other spots too, old places, torn down places." That night, the two of them sat together at Booker's kitchen table and pulled up every delivery app record either of them had access to, cross-referencing addresses against the same city archive database Ellis had used at the library. A pattern started to emerge, slow and unmistakable, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Every glitched order, every impossible address, corresponded to a property that had been destroyed or demolished sometime in the 90s, most of them tied to fires, a few to structural collapses the city had quietly attributed to poor maintenance and never investigated further. And in nearly every case, a name surfaced in the old records of someone who had died on that property and had never been formally memorialized anywhere. No plaque, no rebuilt structure, nothing but empty lots the city had simply chosen to forget. "It's like the app is pulling something it shouldn't," Booker said, staring at the cracked screen of his own phone like it might bite him. Like there's some kind of old data buried underneath the new stuff. A ghost server or something like that. I don't know how else to explain it. Ellis had already considered that same explanation and rejected it as too clean, too comfortable. It wasn't a server issue. It felt personal, the way Walter Finch's voice had sounded right at his shoulder in that empty lot, the way the text messages arrived word by word, like someone composing them with real effort, real intention. This wasn't a bug in the code. This was Walter Finch, 30 years dead, and still waiting for someone to notice he'd never really left. Ellis decided he needed to go back one more time and finish it properly. He returned to Willow Street alone, on a warm evening in late August. No order pending on his app. No tip waiting to be collected. He parked at the curb and walked to the edge of the lot the way he had twice before, except this time he brought nothing with him except the folded newspaper clipping from the library, the one bearing Walter Finch's name and the short, sad account of the life he'd lived and the death nobody had properly mourned. The temperature dropped the moment he stepped past the leaning fence, just as it had before, and the wind through the weeds went still. Ellis felt his pulse hammering, but forced himself to keep walking toward the cracked concrete where the front door had once stood. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his chest. "I know what happened to you. I read about the fire. I know nobody ever came looking for you after, and I know this lot's been sitting empty for 30 years, because the city never figured out who you belonged to." The static came first, faint and distant, the same sound Ellis remembered from that first phone call. Then, slowly, it resolved into something closer to a voice, thin, but clearer than before, carried on no wind Ellis could feel. "Nobody came," the voice said. "I waited. Nobody came." Ellis knelt down and set the folded newspaper article on the cracked concrete, weighting it down with a small stone from the edge of the lot. "Somebody's here now," he said. "I'm not going to forget you. I'm going to make sure the city puts something here. A marker. Your name, so people know you existed, know what happened to you. You don't have to keep waiting for deliveries nobody's really bringing." The cold around him seemed to shift, not disappearing exactly, but softening, like a held breath finally released. Ellis heard the voice one final time, quieter now, almost gentle. "Thank you for the delivery." The wind picked back up. The weeds began to sway again. Somewhere beyond the trees, the ordinary hum of the highway returned, and Ellis realized his breath was no longer fogging in front of his face. The night had gone back to being an ordinary warm California evening, and the empty lot on Willow Street looked, for the first time since Ellis had first pulled up to it, simply like an empty lot, sad, overlooked, but no longer heavy with whatever had been waiting there. His phone buzzed one last time as he walked back to his car. He almost didn't want to look. When he did, the screen showed no new order, no strange notification, just a single text, sent from a number the app no longer recognized as active, the contact name already fading from his recent messages, as though the account itself were closing out for good. "You can stop delivering now. Thank you." Ellis kept his promise. He spent the following weeks filing requests with the city planning office, using the newspaper article and the archive records he'd gathered, pushing for some kind of formal acknowledgement of what had happened on Willow Street in 1994. It took months of calls and paperwork that mostly went nowhere, the kind of bureaucratic silence that makes you wonder if anyone's really listening. But eventually, a small brass marker was installed at the edge of the lot, funded quietly by a city historical preservation grant, bearing Walter Finch's name and the dates of his life, along with a short line noting the home that once stood there and the fire that claimed it. Booker Reyes still drives for the app, though he says he double-checks every unfamiliar address twice now before accepting a job. Corinne, the neighbor with the wheelchair ramp, tends a small patch of flowers near the marker these days, the first thing anyone had planted on that lot in 3 decades. And Ellis Sorensen still delivers food across Stockton most nights, still catches the occasional strange glitch in the app that makes his stomach drop for half a second, before resolving into nothing more than ordinary bad Wi-Fi. He thinks about Walter Finch sometimes, especially on quiet nights driving past empty lots and boarded-up buildings scattered across the city, places most people speed past without a second glance. It taught him something he hadn't expected a delivery job to teach him. Somewhere in this world, on some forgotten street, there is always somebody who was never properly said goodbye to. Somebody whose name got lost between the cracks of an indifferent system. Sometimes all it takes to lay that kind of restlessness down is somebody willing to notice, willing to show up, willing to remember a name that everyone else had let go of. Ellis still keeps that folded newspaper clipping in his glove box, soft and worn at the creases now. Some nights, driving home past Willow Street, he swears the little brass marker catches the street light just right, glowing warm for just a second, like a porch light welcoming someone home.